a lot of people can make beautiful images. Like you have the right gear, the right lights, a cool location, you can make something look awesome. But to like consistently deliver that in different styles and in different scenarios and locations, that's where like that extra little bit of like personal expertise kind of comes into play.
Today on the Video Creator Podcast, I'm excited to have Madison Dyer. We go through his journey of starting creating fun little skate videos and surf videos, all the way to being a full-time director of photography here in San Diego, as well as a colorist. So let's jump right into it. So today we have Madison Dyer on the Video Creator Podcast, and we are excited because you are a director of photography and a colorist. And the whole idea behind this podcast is to help other creatives who want to get into the video production world. And we're going to talk with different people over time in different roles in the video production process. So I'm excited. I've gotten to know you some over the past few years. And I'm just excited to hear your story, how you got into it, what that's looked like, what life lessons you've learned in the process, and hopefully some advice for people as they figure out whether they want to do a video production company, be a colorist, be a director of photography. But can you just start by saying, I know I said your name, but tell us your name. Sure. And tell us about your company.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Madison Dyer. I work as a DP, director of photography, most of the time, and then do some color work as well on the post side. But I work in commercials, like short format, branded documentary. Live in Carlsbad, California.
Okay, awesome. And so how did you get into this field? How old were you when you started? What did that look like?
So I started probably like a lot of people of our like age group there's a video camera at home and I would like shoot skateboarding and, friends doing stupid stuff.
What kind of camera is this?
Oh man. This is probably like Sony Handycam days. So like mini DV tapes and that type of world. But I think when I started editing, prior to like editing on a computer, I would edit on like 2 VCRs and I would like play the tape back on like a mini DV adapter, like those VHS tapes adapter to like a blank tape, and I'd hit record and play it back. Super janky, but yeah, that was in like 5th grade. I was doing that, and we made basically like a Jackass ripoff. Sorry, that's just the name of the show. Don't mean to bring profanity into it, but we made we just made like a skateboard, like silly skit video, and we showed it at the talent show in 5th grade, and I did the edit on 2 VCRs, and everyone thought it was like so funny, and it was horrible. Like, it's like barely watchable, but everyone thought it was great. And I was like, oh, this is so fun to like make something and show people and, see their reaction. But then from there, I think in like 9th grade, I learned how to edit. Our school got Final Cut, and my computer teacher, shout out to Miss Raskauskas, she taught me how to edit Final Cut. She took like the class. I think at the time, maybe they still offer it, but you could take like a series of classes to be like Final Cut Pro certified. Do you remember that? Like early 2000s or so?
I don't. Yeah,
okay.
I never was in Final Cut.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Makes me sound really old now, I guess.
I'm probably older than you, but I worked in Avid.
Okay.
I actually was doing edits in my 8mm camera.
Oh, nice.
So
yeah.
We weren't doing the edit in we did skate videos as well.
Yeah.
But it was like, all right, I want the next scene to be this. And so it would stop and we'd go to the next scene.
Shoot it.
Like it was all in camera.
Yeah. The in camera edit. Yeah. So I learned Final Cut, and we were shooting, our school had a DVX, so Panasonic DVX 100A.
Okay.
And at the time, that was like the sickest camera. It shot like this weird, like pull down 24. It was like the first 24p camera at the time that wasn't like whatever, 30 grand. So that camera, it kind of had like a 16 mil look to it. It had a very interesting look. Yeah. So we shot some like short films at school and got like, class credit for it, whatever. And then I ended up buying one actually. and starting to shoot like skating and surfing. And I had Final Cut from like a license that our school had, like an extra of on my computer. So yeah, I started, I guess, like doing it where I was like, oh, I guess this is a thing I could learn, not just like shooting stuff on home, handy cams.
Yeah.
Probably in high school. And then, yeah, in college, I started shooting some surf movies. So I did some stuff with Captain Fin. They're like a longboard fin company here in Southern California. And I had the opportunity to shoot some stuff during college and then do the edits on those. And they were like 25-minute surf movies. And then was fortunate enough to be able to travel to show those movies like in Japan and some places in Southern California. And that's kind of the first time where I like got paid, not a lot, but I got paid to do it and was like, oh, this is like a thing that I could do for work at some point. I knew very little about the industry. I think that was like a big education for me, was like, I like to shoot, I like to edit, I like to make things with cameras, but like, how can I get paid to do that? And I liked movies and, watching like behind the scenes videos, but the gap between like, yeah, I own this camera and I know how to edit in Final Cut, to like, how do I work on a movie? That was, a very long process, figuring out the industry side of it for me. But yeah, that all happened like throughout college.
With college, what were you studying in college?
So I went to Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, and I was a film studies major there. Their film program's really small. And it's so small that if you do the film studies program there, you go to another school for a semester in Los Angeles. And that semester in LA was like pretty much where I started to see like the business side of it, and beyond just like, hey, I want to shoot surfing and get paid like in t-shirts or sweatshirts or whatever. That's when I started to see like the industry side of it. So it was like 2011, I think, was when I was doing that semester in Los Angeles, and I was an intern at Funny or Die.
Oh yeah.
So like the comedy website for sketches. Will Ferrell and Adam McKay started it, and they had like in-house video production that they would shoot a lot of that sketch comedy stuff, and then they also had, for their bigger jobs, where they'd bring in someone or like do sponsored work, they had DPs and gaffers and sound people and hair and makeup. And as an intern, like whenever we had a job that was one of those like farmed out bigger jobs for Funny or Die, that was when I was like, I have to be on set. Like, I need to see how this whole thing happens when it's just beyond like me and my camera and a couple friends,
Right.
So that was a big learning experience for me. It was being an intern there and kind of seeing the business side of it. And then Funny or Die actually started while I was an intern, Gifted Youth, which is like an agency, commercial agency for like comedy-based commercials. So they could utilize like, their comedy talent to make branded stuff. And that's when I started to see like, oh, this is a bit of how like an agency works.
Yeah.
So that was like all part of the education from, shooting stuff, surfing and editing it myself, to like, this is how Hollywood or the film industry, whatever you want to label it as, this is how it all happens.
Yeah. Wow. So when you were doing that college portion, that wasn't like a traditional film school.
No.
Or did you feel like did that program kind of live up to that traditional film school thing, or?
No, I mean, it was definitely like a 4-year college experience. Like a liberal arts degree. So I was still taking like history and philosophy and all these classes. And then I think the one thing that I'm grateful for that college taught me, like a lot of the skills I use today is not stuff that I learned in college, but it gave me the opportunity to have access to gear and have like a deadline. Like, hey, you need to shoot this short film and it needs to be this theme. It was a lot of it was like writing, shooting, editing. That was like what we did. It wasn't like we were shooting 16 or 35. I mean, we were shooting on actually Panasonic DVXs. So the camera I owned, the school had, but they had like light kits and sound. And I learned a lot about like, simple 3-point lighting and how to run sound and, better editing techniques than what I was learning in high school. But yeah, I think that structure for me really gave me the opportunity of like, I like doing this creative stuff, but when it has a deadline and it has an assignment, it pushed me to kind of frame the creative stuff a little bit more seriously. Like, hey, I have to get this done. I can't just edit this when I feel like it. Like it's college. It's just it's deadlines, regardless if it's a paper or a short film or whatever. But it gave me the opportunity to get my hands on gear, delegate roles to people, and turn something in on time, which is what I do now, just in a different format. So
yeah, and I think that's good. I think creatives, specifically pure creatives, like I don't consider myself a pure creative.
Me neither.
I got my degree in engineering. Like I'm more of that like left brain, right brain mix. But a lot of the pure creatives struggle if there isn't some sort of framework and time frame to it, because you always want to keep being in that space of figuring out the creative next idea, like, and just keep floating in it. But if you have to actually finish it,
sure.
like, I think it's good to be put in positions where you do that, because for business, it's going to be very necessary when you're on a shoot.
Yeah, there's so much give and take in the creative process of like, if you're just an island making these decisions and you're, painting something or doing a passion project, like that's great. You can make whatever you want. But when you have, other cooks in the kitchen, other voices, especially when those voices are the ones funding the reason you're there, you have to frame it very differently. Like, and that's something I learned in college with like, oh, this is how I like to shoot. And like, I like to do like jump cuts and like goofy things. And my professors would be like, well, this doesn't make any sense. It might be funny, but like, it's not serving the story. Yeah. And I was like, oh. So I kind of had to, that was like a light bulb moment of like, oh, it just can't be what I want it to be all the time. There's give and take of what other people want and what serves the project overall.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so you talked about going to college, you doing that program, going up to LA, you did the Funny or Die. What did it look like actually becoming a DP? So did you start out like, obviously now that we're in we're in the 2020s, video production has changed drastically. When you were doing that, it was a lot more of structured, like true roles, DP, first AC, like all these different things. And now you have a lot more people like me who start as a single person owner operated video production company and scale from that point.
Sure.
So what did it look like for you starting out? Did you just go and start working for other production companies? Like what role were you in? What did that look like?
Yeah. So after I graduated college, I was supposed to work at Funny or Die, like doing their in-house like studio work. So like, checking out gear, and if there was an in-house shoot, being a part of that shoot. And I was planning on doing that. And then basically when I was like about to move to LA from San Diego, I contacted them and they were like, oh no, like that position, we're not doing that anymore. So I was devastated. And at the time I was like, oh my gosh, that was my break, into the film industry. And in hindsight, I'm so glad that didn't work out. But what I ended up doing was I met a guy who had a hard drive. I met a guy who I was kind of like interning for. He worked doing like single owner operator, like one man band style shoots in San Diego. And I told him I was moving to LA, and he was like, oh, a friend of mine up in LA, I have his hard drive that has his reel on it. Like I edited his reel for him. If you go up there, can you give it to him? And I was like, yeah, sure. No problem. So I'm driving up to like Palos Verdes, Manhattan, or Palos Verdes, like Torrance area. And to this guy who I have no idea who it is, to give him a hard drive. And so I knock on his door. He lets me in. The guy's name's Todd Heater. He's a super nice guy. And we had some connections of friends through like surf movie stuff. He shot a movie called The Drifter with Rob Machado. That was like a surf movie, but it was like very artsy and cinematic for the time, like 2010s-ish. Like when it came out, it was shot on the Red One and everyone was like losing their minds. So anyway, I had this hard drive to give him, and I sat down, told him I was moving to LA. These are the friends that we share in common. And he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said I wanted to, shoot. And he was like, well, a friend of mine, is an AC. And if you want to like, work for free with him, I'm sure he could teach you some stuff. Todd is a DP, but he also works as a gaffer in LA. So he's huge commercial gaffer, like very successful. So yeah, like a week after that, I was on I think it was a Target commercial. It was like a 2-week long holiday campaign. So this was like 2012.
Yeah.
And I was on set at Warner Brothers backlot working with this camera team in like the world that I wanted to be in for so long. And it just like crazy connection. This guy was so nice, just gave me an opportunity to kind of come in with this camera department that he was friends with, and he was on the job. He was gaffing the job.
Okay.
And I learned about, camera rental houses and camera preps. And, at the time we shot that job on the Alexa EV, which was like a year old at that point. And that was, the hot camera, beautiful. Like we had like master primes on that job. And I was thrust into that world of like, this is what a big set is. This is all the different roles, all the different departments. This is how the machine of, big film production works. So I kind of went from that like scrappy surf world of like doing it all myself and editing, and then really getting a proper education on the film industry, and certainly in the commercial world, or specifically in the commercial world. And so from there, I was like the GoPro guy because I had a GoPro from surfing. The GoPro 1 was out at that point. And a lot of these commercials were using them as like crash cams or like, goofy little things. So I was like the GoPro guy because I knew how to work them. And I mean, the menus on those were like so bad. And this was like before there was even a screen on the back of them.
Right.
So I did the GoPros for a bunch of different commercials, and then got paid to like do camera stuff on set, and it was super cool opportunity. And then got into second ACing, and then joined the union, so local 600 camera union, and I did some second AC work for a number of years. And that's really where like my super formal education of like working with DPs and gaffers and just seeing how the whole world is run. What does it look like to work as a DP and do commercials, and then hop on a feature, then hop on a TV show, and then come back and do commercials. And yeah, it's just a lot more formal than what I was kind of brought up as through like high school and college, when you're just kind of doing it all yourself and guessing.
As you said, a second AC.
Yeah.
For those who don't know what you do as a second AC, what does that role look like?
Yeah, so the second AC does a lot of organization. So on a normal film set, when you have, it all comes from like Super 35 or Super 16 kind of background of gear. You have your camera body, you have lenses, map box, filters, tripod, different size sticks, hi-hat, low-hat. So there's a ton of gear you have to organize beyond just like the world we live in today, where you can have like a Sony A7 with a lens and a battery and like go shoot something that looks pretty good. So there's a lot of gear organization as a second AC, and then you also do the slate. So you're a clapper. And prior to digital, some second ACs would load. You could like load film mags, but on bigger sets, when you're shooting film, you have a dedicated loader position, which now with digital is like DIT or media manager.
Right.
Yeah, so the second AC assists the first AC, who is focus pulling and then also building the camera, because the camera can just be configured so many different ways, whether it's Steadicam or handheld or on a jib or on sticks. It's a bigger piece of gear, so there's all these different things like support, lens support, different size map box, different filters. So it turns into like a lot of inventory, and that's where the rental house relationship on big sets comes into play. Most of those jobs, all the camera package is rented from a camera house. So you have, body, lenses, filters, map box, batteries, sticks, all these different stuff that you're bringing with you. And and that's the fun part of it. That's like the toys, right? So you have all these different configurations that you're building the camera for. And that's still prevalent today, even with smaller cameras like the Alexa Mini and Sony Venice, and the bodies are getting smaller, but you still have to like build them different ways for different applications.
Yeah. So you had your college experience, you shifted into that role. You're up in LA. You're a San Diego guy. So what brought you down to San Diego?
Yeah.
And what was that transition, not only from San Diego, but also to being from second AC all the way up to a DP?
Yeah. So when my wife and I were living in LA, I was second ACing, but on the side, I was like still shooting some smaller projects, and was meeting people. I still had like San Diego connections through like surf industry stuff. And this is like 5D days. So it's like I owned a camera and lenses and was still editing and that kind of stuff on the side. But for the most part, it was like, okay, I'm a union camera assistant and this is like my job. And, but this shooting thing on the side was more just to like keep my hands on a camera and stay connected to that do it yourself kind of world. Yeah, always shooting on the side. And then when we made the decision to move down to San Diego, that was kind of my like opportunity to move up, so to say, like from an assistant to a DP or a camera operator. So I guess, sorry, going back in LA, I worked as a second AC for like 4 years, and then I moved up to being a first.
Okay.
So I was pulling focus and yeah, living in that world of like your relationships are with DPs as a first AC. Those are like your clients, so to speak. Yeah, so just getting to work with DPs that see how they work, see, the decisions they're making on set. That was like my biggest education as a DP now.
I'm sure.
Is assisting for these men and women who are just like at the top of their game, like some of them ASC DPs, and you're just watching them work. It's incredible. It's like so awesome to see how all of that machine, I guess, is, if you want to call it that, works, and ends up making, beautiful images and stuff that's movies that you're like, how did they do this? This is insane. So yeah, that was just an amazing education for me to have that opportunity. So worked as a first, pulled focus for a long time. And then when we had the opportunity to come back to San Diego, that was like, all right, I think this is a good natural break for me to really start operating and DPing on commercials. So yeah, certainly take a hit from like ACing big jobs like Target and Nike, Mercedes, these jobs with, insane budgets, and that's the world you're used to. And then kind of have to restart in a way when you move up to the next crew position. You're back on like smaller sets and you're having to do a lot of problem solving because you don't have all those resources. Like you don't have every single piece of gear at your disposal.
Right.
So yeah, San Diego, started shooting, still assisted for a couple years, was like back and forth to LA. But mostly shooting locally, shooting in Orange County, some travel jobs. And then, now I'd go up to LA to operate and DP some jobs. So
And nowadays, first of all, I love what you do. You're
thank
very
you.
talented. You're gifted. I love your ability in color. Color, I think, is one of those areas that you have to be gifted in it. And it can come with work as well.
Yeah.
But it's one of those areas where like I have to work extra hard with color, whereas some people, it at least seemingly comes naturally.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was developed over time as well.
Yeah. I mean, color for me is like, the beginning. I look at color grades I did when I started. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is rough. A lot of it is, there's definitely like a technical aspect to it, but at some point you're stepping off the bridge of like, technically this is how you do it to this is how I want it to look creatively. And that's where all the like taste and decision making comes into place. Like what looks good?
Yeah.
What do I want this to look like? So
yeah,
it's a technical thing. I'd say like 80%. And then like the other 20% is where you kind of make your style or aesthetic from it.
And I think that's kind of similar to cinematography, right?
Totally, yeah.
Like you can know everything technically and still not create what some people can create because they have it up here,
Right.
how they want to visually bring something out that just maybe doesn't come naturally.
Right.
But when I follow you on Instagram and see stories of what you're working on, from the outside view, it seems like you work primarily with a few companies as the majority.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? And what is that like? Where does your work come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. The majority of my work comes from like 4 or 5 different production companies or directors that I work with, or producers. And sometimes that's them working with their production company, them directing. And other times they're hired as a freelance director and then by another production company. And then they'll bring me in as the cinematographer on the job. But yeah, the film industry, like where jobs come from, you'd think there'd be like some sort of structure to it, but I mean, I'd say 100% of the jobs I do are just friends, word of mouth. Like there's no like, I guess there's networking kind of stuff you can do, but all the jobs I get are just like, hey, so-and-so recommended you, or we saw the thing you did. You know, it's not like I'm on like a job board, like applying for commercials. So that's kind of like I don't know if you'd call it like secret part of it, but it's not like you go on LinkedIn and are like, I'm a DP and these are the jobs I'm looking for. And then people reach out to you. It's all just this like word of mouth network of film industry people who you kind of just have to like put yourself out there and meet people if you're interested. Or it's, yeah, a lot of the jobs that I've gotten are friends of mine who are DPs can't do the job because they're not available, or, you know, it's not worth their time depending on the size of the job. And then they'll recommend me. And then that's, you know, where the network and new relationship jumps off from there.
Yeah.
That's when people ask me like, how do you get work? Like even my family, like, how does this all work? I'm like, oh, it's kind of hard to explain. Like, it's not a structured thing. There's structure to it, and there's ways you can be more, I guess, methodical about getting work. But for the most part, it's like text messages like, hey, are you available these days? This is the job. Do you want to do it?
So obviously there's different scales of companies, right? Who do you feel is the typical person making the decision for a DP? Is it the director who says, oh, I want this style of filmer for what we're doing? Is it the production company themselves? The producer? Like what? Obviously, you know, some companies are, like I said, varying in size, so maybe that's not as much of it. But who do you say is typically the one hiring you?
Yeah, I'd say it's varied. Sometimes it's the director. Like if it's a director who wants, they have a relationship with the DP that we've done these jobs together and it went great. And that the director process for getting jobs is much different than a DP for commercials. Directors have to pitch treatments. So they'll get like, you know, can you pitch basically their idea on this Nike commercial or this car job or, you know, fashion shoot. And so they have to put together imagery and like, this is the tone that I want. And then the agency or sometimes the client, depending on the type of job, will pick a director. And then once the director's chosen, sometimes the producer or the agency will be like, hey, we want to work with this DP. We've worked with them before, or we really like their style that they brought to this campaign we've seen. Sometimes the producer, I would say the 3 people is like the director, the producer, and then someone at the agency that's working with the production company. But that all depends on scale. Like there's, you know, smaller jobs that might be the client is working directly with a production company. The production company, whoever is producing the job at that, would be like, yeah, we work with this DP. Let's work with them again.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all over the place, but yeah, I guess hopefully that
gives
you an answer.
Yeah, I think, you know, for people who are starting out, I think just getting an understanding of what it is to, like, where does that come from? I mean, part of it is going to be networking.
Sure.
But I'm sure just, if not just as important, right below that to the creative level of a DP is how fun are they to work with? Like, how do they problem solve? How do they make the overall experience?
Sure.
Because anyone who's been on a set of a larger scale than like the single person. When you have someone who's a bad cog, a bad
Oh, yeah.
gear, not helping the production, it makes the whole thing a different experience. And so when they can find someone who not only is gifted at filming, but actually makes the experience more enjoyable
Yeah.
for not only the team, but also the client, that would increase the likelihood that you're going to get hired more.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a technical side to it. You're there to execute lighting and imagery and camera decisions, but there's a huge personal aspect to it where it's like, if you're not fun to be around, I mean, most jobs that I'm on are 10 to 16-hour days. So you're spending a lot of time with people, and if you're grumpy or you don't want to be there, you don't have good people skills, you're probably not going to get the call back or make a good relationship with that director or producer or client. So yeah, the personal side to it is gigantic. It's kind of the unspoken, like, hey, do you want to work with this person again? Those conversations that happen after the job is over. And it's like, no, we probably don't want to. They were, difficult or grumpy or demanding. So if you can bring that high level of technical expertise and be personable, I mean, that goes so far, because yeah, filmmaking is fun.
Yeah.
You're spending a lot of time with people, but when you have to start problem solving, that's when people's like real personalities start to come out, because it's difficult to make those decisions sometimes.
Oh yeah. So for our size production company, our typical projects, we have 2, 3, maybe 4 at the most people on a team, just because our projects don't need scale. For you on your average project, what does the team formation look like? What are the members on that team? And why is it valuable to have those different components?
Yeah, so at the top, there'd be a producer. So the producer's role is, very organizational and very dealing with the client and the logistics of enabling all the different crew members to do their job. So you have the producer, then you have the director, then you'd have a cinematographer, DP. I guess to give a caveat to sometimes I say DP, sometimes I say cinematographer, sometimes I say director of photography, and it's all the same person.
Yeah.
So DP, and then most jobs I do have at least a first AC, and sometimes that AC is downloading. Sometimes there's a dedicated downloader, DIT or media manager, and then on the grip and electric side, a gaffer who's in charge of lighting, a grip who's it's very hard to differentiate those roles at first until you kind of work with them, but a grip shapes the light. So flags, bounces, all that kind of stands, like rigging, that type of stuff is a grip department thing. Anything to do with lighting is electric, or the head of the electric department is a gaffer. Then you have the sound department. So you have, typically, most of the jobs I do, it's one person in the sound department. So booming and mixing, doing both roles. But if it's a bigger job, you'll have someone dedicated to running boom and someone dedicated to mixing. Then you have vanities, so hair, makeup, wardrobe. Then you have art department, so you have props, set design, all these different things that you can just, not infinitely, but to a point, just scale out all these different departments. So you have a producer, and then on set you'll have PAs, just hands to help with general production stuff. And then if we need it, a first AD, so a first assistant director who's in charge of sticking to the schedule, making sure people are in wardrobe when they need to be, just kind of making sure we're getting through the day on time. But I'd say a tip I kind of got off track with like how scaled up it can be.
So that's sort of like the big picture of like an ideal shoot?
Yeah, and I'd say the average, job that I do, whether it's in Southern California or traveling, it's a producer, a director, a DP, an AC, sound if we need it. A lot of the jobs that I do are lifestyle shoots, so we're not capturing a ton of sound on set. We're doing a lot of voiceover driven stuff, or sometimes it's just montage with music. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So sometimes we don't even have a sound person on set, and then usually I'll try and advocate for a grip electric person to be there just to help with lighting and, bounces and negative and that type of stuff.
As a DP, so let's say we're on a scaled down shoot where it's a smaller team. When you don't have grip and lighting, are you a part of that lighting process?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I don't have a dedicated person for it, typically if I have a dedicated person, they're bringing a truck.
Right.
So they're bringing a Sprinter van or like a 2-ton truck with lights and stands and sandbags and bounce and negative and all that kind of stuff. But if we don't have that person, I own like a small lighting package, and I'll bring that and just kind of wear my grip and electric hat as well as shooting. And that's like extremely valuable tool to know how to do all that yourself.
Right.
I kind of lived in like two worlds. Like I came up as very DIY and very like do every single role myself. And then I moved into that very formal film industry role where it's like, union, don't touch electric equipment because they have their own union, and don't touch stands. And, you're going to like different trucks to ask for permission to get gear from them. And then I really found the value in knowing how to do a lot of stuff yourself, kind of going back to like where I started of, if the job isn't big enough to hire all these people, you can still pull it off. And that's fun. It's good. It's like a good kind of reset to do a smaller job and to, light yourself and run sound yourself. And even if you're, able to work on those bigger sets and have all those resources at your disposal, it's good to be able to like kind of get back to it and just pull it all off yourself. It's a good tool, good expertise to have.
Yeah. So you mentioned when you started out, you were really into that skateboarding, surfing.
Yeah.
That's kind of where you got your roots in film. And for where you are now, what are the shoots, whether it's paid or passion, that really pump you up, get you excited, get you inspired? What is the stuff that you're thrilled when you get the call that you get to go shoot?
Yeah. I mean, if there's an opportunity for me to get in the water and shoot from the water, that's the best. I mean, I've done a couple projects as a water operator where it's, there's a surf component to it. And that's just like amazing for me because I love surfing. I'm in the water every week. But if I can be in the water with a camera and capture surfing or, whatever it is, swimming, boats. I did a couple jobs for Equinox where we got to shoot surfing or we got to shoot like outrigger canoes. And it's awesome just having a water housing and getting to capture stuff from the water. Because a lot of people are extremely talented DPs, but they just don't have water experience. So when there's a water component to a commercial, they bring in, a water operator. And there's a lot of talented men and women who are just, they're incredible in the water with the camera. But if it's like, hey, can you get some surfing shots for this, gym commercial for Equinox? It's like, yeah, send me out there.
So you wouldn't consider yourself a water operator?
Not really. I mean, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I love doing it.
So you love doing it, but it's not like, I feel like, let's use Hollywood as the term. Like Hollywood, everyone has like a super specific role.
Right.
And so you wouldn't put yourself on LinkedIn as water op.
Probably not. A lot of those people who are dedicated water operators will do scuba stuff. So they're like in tanks on sound stages doing underwater stuff. I guess I'm more of like a surf kind of operator. I'm just, floating around out there with the water housing. I'm not doing any like true underwater scuba cinematography. So yeah, that's a different category. If it really called for like underwater scuba stuff, I'd probably be like, yeah, let's bring in someone way better than me. Yeah.
So that stuff really gets you excited. And so like, for me, something that has not only brought business for our production company, but has helped me get better at passion projects. For you as a DP, how have passion projects become a part? Like, is that something that you try to do? And what do you think that's important in honing your skills or getting better?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something I learned as an AC. It's like I would work with DPs one week, on a car commercial for Ford or something like that, like, pretty healthy budget, arm car, all that kind of stuff. And then they would say, oh, like this weekend, I'm going to do a passion project shoot. If you want to come AC with me and help me out, there's a little bit of budget for it. And so I'd see these, top of their game DPs with all the resources at their disposal to do a commercial. And then they'd go do a passion project with like their personal 5D and like a couple lights. And then I was just there to help. But the opportunity that you get out of a passion project is those parameters that we were talking about earlier of like other people's budget and other people's opinions typically aren't as tight. They may still exist. Whether it's a music video or like an art piece or just something fun you want to do for a passion project, you can be a lot more creative and a lot more free with like your decision making because, you're not having to deal with an agency or, a huge budget that it's like, we need to make sure the client's happy. It's just like you and a couple of your friends going out and making something. And it also taps back into that like skate surf world of like, we're just going to go do something because we think it's cool and it's fun and it might not serve a product or a brand well, but it's creative and that's the value of a passion project.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're going to go into a little fun direction.
Okay.
I feel like most cinematographers, DPs, camera people in general, they love gear, right?
Yeah.
Like
oh
gear,
my gosh.
gear is one of those things that you can spend way too much money on. You
Sure.
can spend way too much time focusing on. Yeah. I think I know what the answer to this first one is. What is your current camera that's like you own and shoot?
Yeah.
And what is the camera that you are thrilled that you can film with?
Oh, cool. Great question. Currently own a Sony FS7. Owned it for a long time. I bought it in 2016. So it's old for sure, especially by camera standards. But it still looks great. I think if you shoot S-Log and you grade it, you can get a really beautiful image out of it. But it's on the chopping block to be upgraded any day now. Gear wise, I guess the dream camera or the one that gets me pretty pumped to go shoot. I mean, anything airy, like I love the Alexa Mini. I'm shooting with the Mini LF tomorrow. Also super interested in the Sony Venice 2, those cameras. I haven't shot with them, but they kind of work off that like cinema camera that can kind of do a couple of things that the Aries can't. Like they have the dual native ISO, so you have like 2 different ISOs to choose from that aren't noisy. Like you can shoot at 3200 on the new Venice, and it's like that's the base ISO.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the gear gets out of control for sure. Like the research you can spend, certainly the money is like it's insane. You can buy a great camera for like I don't know, $1,000 now. And then you start looking at the upper crust of cameras and you're like, that's like $80,000 for just the body, and cards. And you don't even have batteries or lenses to go with it. So yeah, the gear as a camera assistant, or coming up as a camera assistant, the gear, it's like, that's so much of your job is knowing the gear and knowing how it all works together and knowing the best versions of like accessories. So like all the Airy matte boxes are great and the Airy follow focuses and the O'Connor heads, the Sackler heads, like all those like very expensive brands, but they're so well engineered that it does make your job easier to pull stuff off. So
you mentioned that Sony FS7 is on the chopping block.
Yeah.
So if I hold a gun to you right now and you have to choose the camera that replaces it today.
Oh my gosh.
What would that camera be and why?
Probably a Sony Venice. Kind of have my eye on that. It's very expensive. It sounds crazy.
What is the price point?
So a used Venice, there's a Venice 1 and a Venice 2. So you can get a used Venice for like $35,000 right now. Retail, they're like 60-ish.
Yeah.
And then the Venice 2 is like, it's almost $70,000. It's crazy.
Okay.
It's crazy money. It's like, you're buying 2 cars or,
So for you, obviously like from an outsider's view, because for us using an Alexa, using Red, using a Venice, it just doesn't make sense.
Sure.
For the cost reason, though I may want to use one, but it just hasn't made sense. But it seems like as an outsider to that world that the RE is what everyone like covets. Why would, in a similar price point, I feel like you can get a
Yeah.
RE Alexa Mini to a Venice. Is it the fact that it has dual native ISO and is a more versatile camera? Why would you choose that?
Yeah, a lot of the jobs I do, I'd say it's kind of split right now between like, commercials that are like in one location or two locations, where we have support and charging and, you have time to like put filters in your map box and all that kind of stuff. Or I'm like out, like I did some jobs for Ford Bronco last year, and we're like out in the middle of nowhere. We're shooting rock climbers and mountain biking and, very outdoorsy, like running gun style shooting. So what the Venice has and what makes it appealing to me is it has every stop of ND built into the camera. So it has internal NDs, but it has 3, 6, 9, 12, 1.2, 1.5, 1.8, 2.1, 2.4. So you're not having to put any filters in your map box just to control exposure. So that makes things very quick. And then the other thing that it has is audio inputs, which most of the time we have a dedicated sound person, but every once in a while, if you're in a car by yourself shooting, someone driving, it's nice to have audio being recorded on camera, which I know it sounds crazy. Like every camera now has an audio input, no matter the price point. But when you get into that like upper echelon of cameras, sound and camera are totally separate departments.
Right.
So like you can't just put like a shotgun mic on an Alexa Mini or an Alexa EV. It's all like time code based stuff where you're syncing with a sound mixer. So yeah, the Sony Venice, the reason it's appealing to me right now, and who knows, my answer by the end of the year could totally change because of some crazy release. But yeah, the Sony Venice, like Top Gun was shot on it, like tons of beautiful movies. Not that Top Gun's like the most beautiful movie ever, but it looks great. You can scale that camera in either direction. So you can shoot a beautiful commercial at 6 or 8K and, go full like Sony raw negative, or you could scale it back for like a branded dock shoot where you're running around with like as small a camera build as you can.
Yeah.
It can do both jobs pretty well.
No, that's awesome.
That's the reason for it. But who knows? I mean, it's a lot of money. It's way more money than I've ever spent on anything, and it would definitely be like a whole different, from a business perspective. It'd be
based on renting it out as well.
Yeah,
correct?
rentals and financing, and looking at the shelf life of like how long is this camera going to last, and return on investment and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's very easy for creatives to put all their focus on the camera.
Totally.
For you as a DP, how important is the glass? Do you feel like the camera makes a bigger impact or the glass?
Man, I've heard both sides debated like extremely well. I would say for me, I own like my just in my back pocket lenses that I've had for a long time are just Canon L series stills glass that I just have little follow focus rings on. And like those are fast primes. You can get tons of different focal lengths. They're full frame and they're relatively inexpensive compared to, cine glass, like a master prime or something like that. So I've shot a ton of projects with Canon L series primes, and a lot of people are like, oh, what glass was that? Was it Leica? Was it Zeiss? Whatever. And I'm like, it's just Sony, or it's just Canon L series primes. So my vote would be the sensor. I'd rather have the sensor of choice and then pair it with not like garbage lenses or anything, but I know what those Canon L series are going to look like. And I'd rather put those on, an Alexa Mini versus putting, I don't know, like a K35 on, not trying to dunk on anyone's camera, but like a Blackmagic Pocket or like an A7 or, Panasonic EV. I don't even know if that camera's relevant anymore.
Just keep listing the cameras that we have.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Let's see. I got an FS5.
Blackmagic.
Yeah. That would be my vote, just because especially from a color perspective, like that sensor is, the light has to come through the glass and it definitely gives it character, and and there's tons of aspects of an image that resolves through a lens.
Yeah.
But then the way it lays down to a sensor, whether it's dynamic range, noise, color science, the flexibility that you have with that image in color later, to me is more important than like, oh, are these flares warm? Are they blue? You know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that would be my vote. But that's like a nerd perspective of like, you know, color DaVinci Resolve stuff.
Yeah. Which, if you're not in DaVinci Resolve, you should be, because there's a lot you can do in there for sure.
It's crazy.
Far more than I have time to.
Oh man, and
learn.
they keep adding stuff. Like
Yeah.
every release, I'm like, oh, what's this whole tab related to VFX? I'm like, sorry guys, I have no idea how to use that.
So I have a question that you can choose not to answer.
Okay.
If you don't want to.
Okay.
You can take it one of two ways. What is one of your biggest failures that you've had, and what did you learn from it?
Okay.
Or what was one of the most catastrophic shoots you've been a part of?
Oof.
And you don't have to name the clients or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Okay.
But thinking of helping others learn,
Sure.
what's something you've learned from either side of those?
Catastrophic shoot. I've definitely been a part of jobs that have gone sideways, mostly as an AC, where it's just like egos are just like out of control, unchecked, you know, whether it's the director or usually not the DP. Most of the time it's the director or someone on the agency side just wants their voice heard louder than anyone else's. And the egos just, you know, people are being mistreated. There's a lot of rude, toxic environment going on. And it's like, okay, guys, at the end of the day, we're making a commercial for Pepsi or we're making like a dog food commercial. We don't have to be hostile towards each other. And that's a huge part of the people I work with currently. It's like, it's people I want to hang out with. It's those relationships of like friends, essentially. They're coworkers, but it's like, these are people I would hang out with if we weren't on a commercial. And I've told people who've asked me like, you know, career advice, whatever you want to call it. You can do the same commercial, like we'll just say it's like a Ford car commercial, and you could make it the worst day of work ever for someone. You could, you know, just terrible organization, you know, the way you communicate to others on set could just put people down. Or you could shoot the exact same commercial and probably make it better and have fun and be kind and make it a collaborative process. So yeah, definitely the catastrophic commercials that I've been a part of are just like, why are certain people making this so hard? Like there's no reason to make it difficult. And there's times like we've talked about with problem solving, like you have to problem solve no matter how well you prep for a job. Things are going to come up that you're like, I didn't think about that, or we didn't know about that until we got to the location. So your attitude as a crew member, problem solving is gigantic because those problems are inevitably going to come your way, and how you deal with them, whether it's, you know, listening to people, being a good communicator, you know, not getting completely thrown off your game because one problem came at you, dictates the outcome of the shoot, dictates the experience for the client. It's a huge aspect of how you can do the exact same job, make it super hard or make it super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is huge.
Yeah. And then if you want to get like a nitty gritty, like detail, I know that was all very high level stuff. I was on a job with a water operator and the housing flooded this was like 2015. So it was a red Epic with Cook Speed Pancros, and we were shooting in a pool, and I don't think it was my fault. I've run this scenario over in my head so many times, but it was a Hydroflex housing, which is like a cinema housing with there's like 10 latches on it. You basically build the camera and then you put it in this like pill looking thing, but it's the size of like a microwave. It's super heavy, but it's the way to put a cinema camera in an underwater housing, a dive housing. And there's an alarm in it for moisture. And if it gets wet, it starts beeping. And he went down, and I don't know if a latch got popped when he went down, like on his wetsuit. I don't know what happened, but when he came up, the housing had like 3 inches of water in it, and the camera was still on. The way those housings are designed, they're a couple inches off the bottom, so when water gets in and collects, it'll send the sensor off, the moisture sensor. so you have time to come up. But when we opened the housing, it was like, psh, like a water bottle worth of water came out of this housing, and it was like, oh my gosh.
Did the
So,
camera survive?
no, the camera died. Yeah. So I won't name any names, and I mean, as I said, I've played this scenario over my head. It could have very well been my fault, but I worked with tons of Hydroflex housings prior to that.
Yeah.
I went around the world with the underwater housing and an underwater operator and never had any problems. But the lesson from that is, even if people are yelling at you on set, like, we got to get this going, you still have to do things safely and to a certain standard as to not put yourself in danger, others in danger, or even as, trivial as it is, gear, which can be replaced, but you still don't want to trash, tens of thousands of dollars of gear just because you were moving quickly. You still have to have a level of, safety that you're adhering to in order to not, damage anything or people.
Yeah. I can't imagine the ball in your stomach when you saw that water.
Yeah, it was a pretty rough day, but fortunately it was the end of our shoot. It was like the last shot. And yeah, it was for a short film. So no, it was for a feature.
Okay.
Up in LA. So yeah.
Man.
Yeah. Water and cameras. I've done a lot of water stuff. And unfortunately there's just times where things fail, O-rings, latches, whatever, and that water's going to come in. But you don't want it to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff, you have to take the risk if you want the shot.
Yeah, it's a risk. You're putting electricity underwater in a microwave looking thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of similar with drone and aerial stuff,
Totally.
right?
Yeah. How many drones have you crashed?
I've crashed 0.
Whoa,
but I've barely flown them.
Okay.
So there's
Yeah. I've flown 20 times maybe. I'm definitely not a drone operator, but I've done it like early Mavic days where it was like,
I
these
had a
things are
Mavic.
so easy to fly and they fit, in like a tiny little bag. And I was international in Peru, DPing a job for Compassion International. And they're like, can we get some drone shots? And so I taught myself how to fly. And I was just doing like, straight down, straight up. I was like, I'm not going to get crazy. And I've never crashed. But yeah, all drone operator friends, it's like, oh yeah, I've crashed a bunch. Like whether it's trying to land it on a boat.
Yeah.
Or
Scary
Yeah.
when they start not just having like a Mavic, but you're throwing an Ari.
Totally. Yeah. No, I don't know a lot of people who have crashed like those setups, but yeah, Mavics, the Phantom, like early Phantom days of those drones. I know a guy who's crashed like 20 drones at this point. So, but he's a pretty wild flyer. So.
Making sure he gets that crazy shot.
Yeah, he's going for it. And he's like, if I crash, I crash, whatever.
That's his insurance company doesn't want to hear that.
No. Yeah.
He probably just pays for it.
Yeah. Athos Insurance. Please do not know who I'm talking about.
This is a question that's, you can have your own opinion on, but doing the AC thing, getting to see a lot of DPs, working as a DP for a while, if you were to say what makes a good DP, and it doesn't have to be a perfect definition, but what are a few characteristics that you think help make a great DP?
That's a good question. I think a big part of it, and that as I get deeper into working as a DP, is the prep aspect, going in with a plan, knowing what gear you're going to need to achieve this. So knowing your gear and being able to kind of plan ahead of time, like the pre-production aspect of it, to communicate to producers like, hey, I'm going to need an arm car, or I'm going to need a hostess tray to get this shot of someone driving a car from the outside. I'm going to need this periscope lens to get the camera in this weird position. The further I get into it, where jobs start to get a lot more varied, and it's like, hey, we want to try this crazy thing. How can we pull that off? Having those answers without spending any money is a great tool to have. Like, hey, I know we're going to need X, Y, and Z to achieve what's on this treatment. And a lot of times those questions get asked and you give an answer, and then maybe that shot never happens.
Right.
But it's like a good mental exercise of, how would we do this? And you're not making those decisions on set, because a lot of those, in order to be successful at those types of requests or whatever's in the shot list, you have to like rent that gear. You have to prep for it. It's not something you can just like all of a sudden on set like come up with.
Right.
So yeah, that's a big part of it. I think the bigger jobs get is kind of the pre-production side of things. And then on set, it's all about problem solving. I mean, that is like such a huge aspect of my job is we're here, we want to light this thing, but there's a wall here and we can't get the light where we want it. You know, we're going for like a sunset vibe. How can we make it look like this? In an ideal world, you're like on a sound stage where you can move walls and like have a grid and do like all kinds of stuff.
Right.
But sometimes it's like, this is the location and we need to figure out a way to problem solve. And that's where I saw as an AC, DPs just doing super creative problem solving and not letting it throw them off their game of like, oh my gosh, we have this problem and we didn't plan for this. And it's just, we can't shoot. Like that's never the option. The option is figure it out and make it the best you can. And you learn a lot through that problem solving process, whether it's collaborative, like I can lean on a grip or I can lean on a camera assistant to kind of figure this out all together. Or it's like, hey, I've dealt with so many problems like this on set before that I can, you know, use my prior experience to come up with something quickly.
For sure.
So yeah, the pre-production side is so important, the on-set problem solving. Because a lot of people can make beautiful images. Like you have the right gear, the right lights, you know, a cool location, you can make something look awesome. But to like consistently deliver that in different styles and in different scenarios and locations, that's where like that extra little bit of like personal expertise kind of comes into play.
Yeah.
And then lastly, just kind of what I alluded to earlier of the personal aspect of like, are you a nice person to do this job with?
Yeah, for sure. No, those are great tips.
Yeah.
I think with the problem solving side, something that I've learned and that can be really helpful is like, you're not always going to have a solution that's a perfect solution.
Sure.
Right? Like it's a problem. And so what I've found is when you can create a couple solutions and offer them to the client, whether that be your director or the client directly, like here's the issue, whether it's sound, light. We have two options. They're not perfect options, but these are ways that we can get close to getting what we hope for.
Right.
Take a look or take a listen. What do you prefer?
Yeah.
Sometimes that sets you up for better success than just choosing one yourself and then them being like, well, why is this? And it's like that communication in the problem solving for me has always been as important as coming up with a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. The communication, and then that opens up the whole collaborative aspect. So we've recognized this problem. This is what I think. And then someone else might have an incredible idea you didn't even think of. And that's a collaborative aspect of filmmaking. It's like, this is my role as a DP to make these camera and lighting decisions, but I'm not like a closed book of, you know, everything ends with me decision wise. Like I'll totally take people's input. I may not use it every time, but there's times where like my AC will have an incredible idea. I just wasn't looking at it the way they are. And it's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. That made a huge difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, collaboration and offering a couple different solutions and not just, this is what we have to deal with. Like that's when you can hear other voices and hopefully make the thing better than it was just you making the decision.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say the majority of our problems stem from sound.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like that is like, literally, I swear that a lawn mowing crew follows me wherever I'm going. Like they have their blower out, their weed whacker just ready for me to start rolling.
Yeah, they just see the mic go up and they're like, all right,
it's about time.
Yeah. No, in LA, I've been on tons of commercials where, you know, you're dealing in neighborhoods with super nice houses and you're shooting in a nice house, and next door the landscaping crew and the producer will go next door and pay off the landscaping crew to leave. Like, hey, this is going to ruin our whatever budget, $400,000 budget commercial. Can you guys leave? And they will pay them off to leave. Yeah. Which isn't obviously an option all the time. But sound, you don't realize how important sound is until you start recording and you're like, oh my gosh, it's always noisy. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem noisy, but when you start listening, you're like, there's always noises.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many, especially people who haven't filmed before,
Yeah.
which we have plenty of clients where it's their first time on a video set,
Yeah.
where they have never been attuned to the background noise of an environment.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they're like, where are all these noises coming from?
You're like, yeah, you guys have a super loud air conditioning.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I could go on and on about commercial buildings and how complicated they make it to control light, air.
Right.
It's like, oh, we need engineering. Why do you have an engineering department who needs to just have an AC button so we can turn it off?
Yeah,
like,
you're shooting in the building. It's like, yeah, there's a whole department to get the thermostat off. You're like, really? Yeah. Or these lights never turn off. I don't know if you've done a shoot where it's like, hey, we want to shoot in this area. We just need to get these like overheads off. And they're like, those lights never come off. And you're like, okay, I guess we'll black them out. But if we could just find the switch, that would be helpful.
Well, a lot of buildings have an emergency light that they can't come off.
Yeah.
And we had a shoot recently where luckily it was this like long, slender light, and we just gaffed the
just tape it
entire
out.
thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of those you just get in the room and you're like,
yeah. Then you just have to make sure you take the tape down when you leave.
yeah, for sure.
Done that before.
I think we did.
Yeah.
It was at a hotel. They'll figure it out.
Oh, they'll be fine.
No, I'm sure we did. So 2 more questions for you.
Sure. Yeah. This is fun.
You were talking a little bit about this, but I'd love to get some insight as a DP. What does the pre-production side typically look like for you? Because I know as a DP, you have your day rate and people hire you for the day, but are they typically just hiring you a day rate for that one day? Or are you often in the pre-production? Like I know you just mentioned yesterday you were scouting for a shoot. How often are you part of the scouting or even like the creation of the vision for a project visually?
Some companies that I work with frequently, I'll be brought in on the creative side just because they know that they're going to have me shoot this. So if I can come in as early as possible when they're talking to the client, we can kind of start that process of what gear we need, what's this going to look like. But most of the time I'm brought in once the treatment has been pitched, the director's been chosen, they have a pretty good idea of the creative. And so probably that pre-production call where it's like, we know where we're going, this is the location, whether it's a Zoom call or, yesterday scouting on-site location scouting is way better than trying to do it on, Google Maps
For
or
sure.
getting pictures or videos. But there are times when you just don't even get a scout. That happens all the time, travel-wise, or you can't get into the location until the shoot day. Typically, I would say I'm certainly paid for, or I'm brought in for the shoot day. But if I can get a scout, that's probably half the time I'll get a scout day. And the scout day is like so valuable you're at the location, you're thinking about shooting it, but you don't have that pressure of we are shooting today. So you can kind of play around with a lot more, throw stuff up against the wall figuratively and see what sticks from a creative. Like, hey, should we put should our location for this product be here or here? What are the pros and cons? And scouts obviously cost money, but it can save you just tons of time going into the shoot day with being prepared to have all those voices and opinions kind of ironed out as best as you can before you put a camera up and the sun is starting to set and, the day is burning, so to speak. But yeah, there are plenty of jobs that I get brought in where it's just the shoot day and maybe I'll have a call. Hey, this is what we're doing. It's going to be a commercial in a house for a snack bar. And I'll try and get as much of that information to then pass on to other people, whether it's like my AC or the gaffer or the grip or those whole departments, just to kind of go into it with as much information to make those decisions as possible. Like the more information, the better, obviously to a point. But sometimes you're just going in completely blind. Like, hey, we're flying out, we're shooting an interview with this person. We have no idea what this office space is going to look like, or if outside is too loud. and you just have to kind of make those decisions when you get there on the
Yeah.
day, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's all over the place, but
Right. Do you have your phone? Do you have like a still camera? Do you bring your FS7? What are you doing when you're on an
yeah.
actual scout?
Scouting, I use the Artemis app. It's an iPhone, or maybe they do it for Android for all you nerds out there. But it's an app that you can put your camera in, you can put your lenses in, and it gives you like focal length. So
Oh,
like
nice.
this is what the 25 will look like, the 50, and I'll walk around with the director and just kind of put up like, hey, it would be nice to shoot a wide here. We can do the product close up here. And that's a super valuable tool because not only is it the finder, like your director's finder, but it takes the picture, records it, tells you the focal length, all the metadata. So then you can use those as references for the shoot day. So I used to scout with the Fuji X100T, but it was just one focal length. And I would take a bunch of scout pictures and it was like, well, this isn't exactly what it's going to look like because it'll be a tighter lens. And what's the Artemis app got pretty good. And I saw other DPs using it. It's amazing just to like, you can pick any sensor. Like tomorrow we're shooting on the mini LF open gate. So it's a 3x2 sensor.
Right.
So we get our 16:9 frame. But if they want to do vertical 9x16, like social media stuff, it gives you like room on the top and bottom. So I can show them like, hey, this is what the open gate on the Zeiss Supreme Prime 29 mil, exactly what it will look like.
Wow,
and then
that's
I can
crazy.
take a picture and then email it to them, and they have like references from the location of the scout day. It's just a nicer way to like bridge that gap between like, is everyone on the same page as to what this image is going to look like? Obviously it'll look way better than an iPhone picture, but it wasn't like, oh, I was envisioning that to be 100 mil shot and you have it as a wide. Just kind of gives people some imagery to work off of. Scouting with that app is amazing. And then Helios is, like a Sunseeker app. Artemis and Helios are the same company that make those. And Helios, you can do some like crazy like 3D renderings of like, if you can't get to a location, you can do a sun path and see like where the shadows are going to be. When is the sun going to dip behind that building and shadow our location?
Yeah.
And you can share that like screenshots and stuff like that with people. So those are the two apps I use. And then it's just talking like, do you have a shot list? Do you have a storyboard to kind of figure out what we're doing?
Yeah.
But yeah, scout days are like amazing. If you can get them, it just makes the shoot day way better. And the cool thing about scouts also is like you can plan for all that stuff, but then when you're shooting and you have a camera up, it's like, hey, let's go over here. We didn't even think about that thing on the scout. You can just let, kind of that spontaneous stuff pop up and go do it. And it's great. You don't have to like scout for every single thing, but it helps get the big chunks of it taken care of.
Well, sometimes even scouting before you're like ready to go film can be huge. Like
totally.
One of the biggest benefits for a project we had, one of my buddy's production companies, he brought me on to film with him, his client, Aptera. It's a new electric vehicle based out of Southern California. It looks like a spaceship.
Cool.
It's really cool, but we were trying like, what can we give for an iconic San Diego look? And give you that coastal vibe.
Yeah.
And so we went down to the glider port.
Oh, cool.
And went up and just was like, hey, could we pay you to basically bring this car down onto the bottom of the glider port at sunset to get some shots?
Yeah.
And they talked like, yeah, for $1,000, you guys can do that. And we're like, $1,000 will definitely spend that.
Yeah.
To like, there's no shot you're ever going to get on the cliffs in Torrey Pines of a car. Like,
totally.
Like they may never do that again, but I think going on a scout and even being willing to just ask people.
Yeah.
Cause some of that stuff's complicated to get lined up locations.
Yeah.
Is pretty cool. Cause we had called, and tried to figure out with parks. Cause there was this other spot on the cliffs, that you could get to that was like a park ranger would need to approve, but they didn't think it was stable enough. So we couldn't get approval there, but just being able to have time to do that stuff.
Like the stakes are so much lower than a shoot day. So you have time to like kind of spitball creative ideas, and so much good creative thinking can happen in that space. Just like, hey, go ask that guy. And the guy's like, sure.
Sure.
Like
why
maybe
not?
that guy doesn't own the glider port, but he'll be
He
working
took the
tomorrow and
$1,000.
he's $1,000 richer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That shoot, we literally, the car got there. So we wanted it, let's say 45 minutes to an hour before the sunset.
Yeah.
It got there after the sun had dropped. So we're just using like
Yikes.
basically blue hour.
Yeah.
Still got some killer
Yeah.
shots.
It probably looks sick.
But you're just like,
Yeah.
this is like the shot.
Right.
And we couldn't get it there on time.
Yeah. I mean, that's a classic like flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
You can't approach filmmaking 100% rigid
Yeah.
because
Not
the
everything
car
works
gets there
out.
late and it's like, what are you going to do? It's like, you can't be like, well, I guess we're going to can the whole commercial because the car's here after sunset. It's like, no, like keep
Yeah.
going and
Yeah.
it'll probably be great. You just have to be nimble
Yeah.
to work around that.
So I lied. I came up with one extra question
Oh,
before
yeah.
the last one.
Let him rip.
The question, I recently made a YouTube video about this for ourselves. What's one piece of gear you regret buying?
Whoa.
Do you have any
Regret.
bad purchases that was like impulse?
I don't think I do. And
Okay.
I guess the reason for that is because all the gear I've purchased is stuff that I've seen, like it's not a brand new product.
Yeah.
I've never purchased something that it's like, hey, this thing just released and it seems cool. Like all the blogs are writing about it. And I'm going to buy it like the first month it comes out. All the gear I've purchased is stuff that's like in rental houses. Like, hey, this is the 17-inch monitor that everyone uses. It's wildly more expensive than, you know, some of the other options.
Right.
But it's like, this is the tried and true version of that gear.
Yeah.
And that comes from camera assistant background. Like rental houses have to make that decision constantly. Like this new thing came out. Are we going to buy it? Like, are we going to get all the bright tangerine follow focuses and matte boxes? Or are we going to get the airy ones? Or, you know, so there's kind of like a standard of gear. And unfortunately, it's like the most expensive versions of everything. That typically that's what I'll buy just because I know it's like the shelf life of it will be good.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've had friends buy like, you know, I have an easy rig that I love using, but it's extremely expensive for what it is. Like the, you know, the Skyhook Scorpion setup. Yeah. And I've had friends buy like, oh dude, I found an easy rig knockoff on eBay. It's like $300. Yours was 5,000. Like, I'm just going to get this one. And then it's like, you're hanging your camera off of this like potentially breakable string that's going to drop it. You know, friends who have purchased stuff like that. And then they're like, man, you know, I tried to like save a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And then this thing ends up breaking and my camera falls. And
Yeah.
so I've seen tons of people do it. My whole motto with buying gear, it's like buy once, cry once. So you buy it up front. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. But then if you purchase it and it's like that piece of gear, like my FS7 works for 6-7 years,
Right.
that money you spent up front to like, it hurts. You're only doing it once.
Mm-hmm.
You're not buying the cheap one and then it breaks. And then you're like, well, the cheap one wasn't good. I guess I have to buy the expensive one now too.
Right.
So
yeah. No, that's definitely.
I'm trying to
happened.
think if there's anything that I bought that I'm like, oh, that was a total flop. Probably some like vintage lenses off eBay where I'm like, yeah, I'll give this a swing and see if it looks cool. And then I get it and I'm like, poof, this thing is so crazy looking that it's like unusable.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 5D days, they made this like, it was a port cap, but it had a pinhole in it. So you could film like pinhole
Yeah.
motion. And it had a crazy look. Like it kind of looked like Super 8, but more than anything, it was just like light leaking onto the sensor. And I was like, this could be cool. And we use it for like a surf video, but it's like unusable for like a commercial or anything you need to recognize what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess fortunately I haven't had too big of like, I bought this thing and I never use it.
Yeah.
And sometimes if I buy something and it's like project specific, like, hey, we need 10 tube lights for this job. And it's like, okay, I'll just buy them. I'll usually like sell it just to kind of get out from the investment a bit, make some money back on it.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, that's partially because of the different worlds that you can be in video production. Like the fact that you're in more of those larger production style, everyone is using, you know, the right kinds of lenses, all this different stuff. Like for us, we recently bought this 21-inch monitor. And for us to buy the small HD version, the cost versus the return on investment for us,
Right.
it doesn't make sense to invest as much. But we're taking a risk using this Chinese brand that there's some reviews on, but you're like, is it really worth it? And so I feel like our style production company, and I think another reason why we have to take these risks is a lot of the productions that you're on, people are actually like the production pays for the rental of the
Right.
equipment. Like our production packages almost always include the equipment,
Right.
unless we have to rent specific stuff. Like one shoot, we actually brought a Phantom on, or stuff like that. And so with that said, it's like, if I go spend 50 grand on a camera
Yeah.
versus 10 grand on a camera, if the client thinks it's included, they don't care what you spend.
Right.
And so I think that does make it a little more, maybe one of the negatives, and maybe I should rethink this pricing model. But one of the challenges for someone like us is we have to then, okay, what can we get our best bang for our buck?
Right.
Like, for instance, right now we're thinking of adding a few more lights to our kit, and aperture has become one of the industry standards. It
Yeah.
used to not be, but
Yeah.
we've been aperture for everything. But there's this company Nanlite who makes the Nanlite Forzas.
Yeah.
The Nanlite Forza 500, which is a little less power than the Aperture 600, is $780, when the Aperture 600, they have a 600 and a 600 Pro. Their 600 is now like $1,400, and their 300s are about $1,000. So it's like, I can get two 300s or I can get two 500s, trying to find like, what is that worthwhile trade-off?
Totally.
And it's hard to know.
It's super hard to know. You are taking a risk like every time you buy gear. And granted, I don't want to sound like a snob, like, oh, I only use Airy and we're all PL mount glass. Like, I mean, there's plenty of times where the lights I own are Aperture, and I've used I have Nanlite tubes. Like, there are tons of, I guess if you want to call them like disruptive companies in gear right now.
Right.
And it's not to say just because it's made in China, it's like bad. I think that was kind of the like, flavor of a lot of that gear. It's like, well, the German stuff, the US stuff, that's the best. And then everything else is like a tier below. And like Aperture, Tilta, some of these Chinese companies, they're like totally changing the way people are thinking about gear. It's like very nice, well-made stuff. They're listening to customer feedback. So yeah, there's tons of great gear out there. The main thing for me is like shelf life. Like, if it's going to cost $1,000 more, but it's going to last 3 years, you can kind of justify like that cost over the life of the product.
Right.
But yeah, there's so many great monitors now that are like a fraction of the cost. And you just have to do your research and like making sure the voices of people that you're listening to, whether it's on YouTube or blogs, like, are these people experienced? Like, do they actually work on set?
Right.
Are they working with this gear? Are they just like gear
They've
review
used it
people?
once.
Yeah, like they sent him this light or this monitor one time for free, and now they have to say nice things about it. Yeah, just making sure you're kind of doing your due diligence before you buy a piece of gear, because camera, lighting, sound, all this equipment is just astronomically expensive. Like, people ask like, oh, how, when you're shooting, you have a camera dangling off an easy rig in public, how much does that cost? Like I just don't want to say, because it just sounds absurd. It's like, it costs more than sometimes like a super nice car, and you're just running around with it dangling off of stuff. But yeah, there's a business model to support the rentals of that gear, and you can be savvy with purchases and making sure that you are going to like see a return on stuff you buy, and you're not just buying it and wasting, $10,000 just to say you own X piece of gear for like the, cool factor.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's the temptation for that though.
Oh my
too.
gosh. Yeah. I'm
Like
tempted by
people-
that all the time.
I feel like it's maybe it's getting better, maybe it's not. But I feel like the past 5 years, I would just see, red was just like the cool factor.
Right.
And so like you go to someone's video production website and all they have is photos of their red camera.
Right.
Like they don't have.
Yeah. You're like, what are you
work.
shooting
Yeah.
with this red? It's like, no, I own a red.
I own a red though.
It's like, okay, but let's see the spot.
Yeah. And so, but it's that temptation. Like there are certain things, like if you have just a small mirrorless, like an A7S III, which is the camera filming you, it can do a ton.
Totally. It looks great.
But if you show up on a set with that, or if you take that same camera and rig it out,
Right.
cage, put a matte box, all this different stuff, the perspective that the client has
Yeah.
is different.
It
And the
is.
perceived value is different. So you do have to find that balance of buying equipment that is going to add value,
Yeah.
not only what it does, but also to the client, like
Right.
that they see you have something that's professional,
Yeah.
that it makes it for the client that they know they couldn't do that themselves.
Right. Yeah. If you're just like, hey, we're going to shoot this thing on a mirrorless, there's like nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah.
you need to bring that value of like, we're professionals. Gear is a bit complicated. It's not
Yeah.
like the hardest thing ever to learn.
For sure.
But yeah, are they getting value for like, we're paying you? It's like, all right, well, the new iPhone looks pretty good. We could just shoot this on my iPhone.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, well, different worlds, let's keep
Yes.
it in perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, the gear thing it's extremely tempting to, well, if I just had $50,000, I could be like, Claudio Miranda, or I could be Roger Deakins. They have like the nicest gear. But I think what was really humbling for me was seeing kind of what I was saying earlier, like some of these cinematographers working on a commercial, and then I go do a passion project with them and they're like shooting it on a 5D. It's like, well, I own a 5D and a Canon, 24-70. And this looks way better than when I shoot with my 5D. But it's because, lighting, composition, all these things come into play to make an image. And the gear, it gets you there for sure. But it's all the technical, like, know-how to use that piece of gear. They're all just tools. At the end of the day, like, these things are just tools that you can't get too caught up in the weeds of, like, the technical stuff. Because there's stuff shot on, I've watched spots that were like 5D with like a Canon L series. I'm not advocating like super hard for Canon L series. I know I keep bringing it up, but they're just very
Sponsor. You're sponsored.
Yeah,
By them.
Canon USA, hit me up. No, but I've looked at stuff that was like a 5D. It's H.264 8-bit compression. Like, it is not that beefy of a digital negative, and it's like, wow, this stuff still looks really good. Someone did an excellent job. Yeah. Just using it as a tool, not getting caught up in like, well, it's got to be 16-bit RAW and like it has to be these lenses. It's like, don't get caught up in that. At the end of the day, we're just making images.
Yeah. So, last question. I promised we'd get there.
Oh, no. No problem.
Is throughout this whole thing, you've been giving great advice. If you were to speak to yourself at 18 or 22,
Yeah.
what do you wish you knew before going into this field? Or what advice would you give to someone who's aspiring to now be a director of photography? What's your best advice for them?
Yeah. I would say just stay self-motivated. It feels like as you kind of go through your career, it's like I've arrived at a point, like I kind of know 99% of what I should know. But the people that I've worked with as an assistant or like my peers who are just constantly like learning and teaching themselves things, that's a huge benefit to like being on top of it as things change, whether it's cameras or like, hey, we need to deliver 9x16 and 16x9 at the same time. I mean, if you would have said that to a cinematographer in like the year 2000, they'd be like, get out of here. Yeah. That is like, we're not delivering a vertical portrait moving image. But as things change with technology and branding, commercials, at the end of the day, you're selling a product or a brand. You have to be flexible. So staying self-motivated to like teach yourself those things, whether it's looking stuff up on YouTube or just talking to people who've done it before. I think there was a point out of college where it was like, I've worked on, these big jobs with ASC DPs on the back lot, and I've done arm car jobs as an AC. Like I pretty much know everything. And then I would go do like a small passion project, and those types of questions like, hey, can we do 9x16 at the same time? I was like, oh my gosh, I really have to figure this out because it's not the standard. This is like the new wave of things to come, and that is always around the corner. Like what's the next thing, whether it's 3D in the early 2000s. I was a part of like VR stuff in like the 2010s, and just being able to be like, yeah, I'll figure it out and I'll learn as I go. You just don't want to get stagnant and like, I kind of know everything. Like I don't have anything else to learn. I would tell myself that because I was definitely susceptible to that after like joining the union as an AC and feeling like I've arrived. And then little did I know, like as a DP, it's, just constant education. There's always stuff changing and requests are coming in that you've never encountered, and being flexible is, so important. So yeah, that's the advice I would give. I guess practically speaking, like just go shoot. Like if you want to make images, if you want to be a DP, if you want to work on a film set, the gear is like so accessible. Learning how to shoot and edit, it's like the golden era right now. I mean, I'm sure something will change and it'll get even better, but relative to like even you can edit stuff on your phone. Like you can learn to shoot like pretty beautiful images off a relatively inexpensive piece of gear. Yeah, just go shoot and make stuff, because if you wait around for someone to hire you to do it and you're not making images, you probably aren't going to get hired. Like you need to like be putting stuff out and kind of honing your craft as you go.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on this and talking with us. I think this is going to add a lot of value and really help some people out. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was so fun.